So Games Workshop's officially confirming that the indexes are dropping over the next week or so. We've got a new datasheet for a Space Marine captain, one rule for Space Marine army construction, and a couple of other interesting details besides. Let's talk through Games Workshop's preview on detachments and datacards. Hello and welcome back to Warspets Tactics, where today we've got a few interesting little teasers for a few different things. I thought we'd just talk through an article that Games Workshop's just published on the new index data cards that are going to be coming out. They have some interesting confirmations as to how they're going to be released, plus the digital rules. They go into a bit more depth as to what's going to be on them and some specific exceptions for a couple of armies. We've got a rather nice Space Marine army construction rule that clarifies the chapters thing in the actual full text, and also a datasheet for the new Primaris captain as well, who gets to turn on rage mode and gets incredibly fighty. Data card releases first, and as I'm sure most of you guys will be aware, 10th edition at launch will have free downloadable rules for all factions. The core rules are already out. Games Workshop is going to be following them out with downloads for the individual army datasheets over the course of the next week or so. It does sound like Games Workshop are going to be sticking to that release schedule that was leaked. The factions from Leviathan box will be getting their rules later this week apparently. I think it's supposed to be Tyranids tomorrow and Space Marines on Friday, and then the rest of the armies will have their indexes coming out next week. Going to be a very busy one there. Then, as well as the free downloadable rules, they'll also be following up with these physical data cards for handy in-game reference. Contained within them will be the army rule, detachment and unit profiles, but not points and things, which will be on a separate document. I must admit, even in the face of free rules, which I'm sure lots of people will use, I feel like these cards will still be popular. Handy in-game reference sheets that don't mean that you have to carry an additional book around, and you can literally just pick out the cards that are relevant to your army and have those along with your list. I think they're quite a good idea in that respect. I look like they could be a handy in-game resource. I'm sure a lot of people will want to get a hold of theirs for their own army. Release-wise, we knew that they'd be dropping at around the same time as Leviathan. In this article they say that they're coming just after the Leviathan box set, though to be honest that statement's still a little bit ambiguous as to what it might mean. It could mean that the pre-order's coming after Leviathan, so it might be a 1 week pre-order on the week after Leviathan goes live. That goes live on the 10th this weekend. Or it could be that they don't release until the week after Leviathan does. I guess that would mean the 1st of July for official release there. So you might have a lag time between the Leviathan launch and getting your hands on the physical data cards, though it's kind of nice that we'll be able to peruse those PDFs before then. Seems like 10th edition is also going to be the time when Games Workshop's going to have another go at embracing the digital world now. Free online PDFs is quite a good start, and they said that they would be updated with any errata, which is kind of nice. Means that they're actually going to be a living document that's updated to be correct, a bit of a novelty from Games Workshop. And they're also going to have their new 40k app for this edition. The 9th edition one, while useful, just didn't really see very wide adoption. A few too many errors and things that didn't work meant that a lot of people stuck to Battlescribe. I guess with simpler army construction rules, plus being able to reference everything right from the word go, the app will do better this time around. I think it could be a genuinely interesting way to build armies and access your datasheets, though whether or not it does wind up being behind the Warhammer Plus paywall or not will be quite a big deal as to how widely it's used, I think. Still definitely has the potential to be useful to a good number of people though, even if it is. Then we've got a few more details as to what's on the card, and then some rather interesting clarifications about Space Marines as well. In this article they confirm that on the cards and indexes, they're going to have the army rule for the faction, the launch detachment for the faction, so things like the Space Marine Gladius Force or the Tyranid Invasion Swarm. That'll have the detachment rule or rules, any restrictions as to what sort of units you can field, stratagems, usually around 6 of them it would seem, and a choice of enhancements for characters. So far the ones that we've seen have had 4. Then you'll have datasheets for every single unit in the roster, including an army construction side and then an in-game side. Though again, it doesn't look like points are going to be on these ones, they'll be in their own separate document, apparently released after the indexes, which is kind of annoying for getting your head around what does what. They do look like there'll be a few things that they didn't mention here as well. It looks like some cards might also have an armory page, which will that referenced on the Chaos Space Marine Legionaries datasheet, so maybe some armies with quite a lot of generic war gear might get one of those. And it looks like in the army rules section that might be where you find certain other things, say for example the Chaos Demon Allied rules I'd guess would be there, allowing Chaos players to usually take around about a quarter of their army in Demon datasheets if they want. In this they did also mention a few exceptions as well. Agents of the Imperium are sadly confirmed to have no detachment, as was kind of expected. A little bit on the sad side that one. I feel like if they're making an index set of data cards for them, then throwing in a fun and fluffy single Imperial Agents detachment could have been kind of cool. I guess they want to keep them in their role as allies as opposed to the main event, and maybe if they had given them a full detachment, it might have just led people comparing them to the rest of the other armies and asking why they had a slightly rubbish detachment without many options compared with other forces. Still though, I think it could have been kind of fun. Even if in practicality it wasn't very good, I think that they could have communicated that it's just a get you by type rules with some fun and fluff, rather than Imperial agents really being expected to be played at like 2000 point level or whatever. Might have just been fun to see some enhancements and stratagems and things for Inquisitors. Otherwise, they also clarified that Space Marine chapters will use the army rule from the Space Marines cards. That one does make me question things just a little bit. I hope that this is reprinted on the other cards, as it just seems a bit pointless otherwise. I guess Oath of the Moment isn't exactly the hardest rule to remember though. As at the moment, I don't 100% know whether they've confirmed if, say, the Blood Angels cards will also come with the generic Space Marine datasheets as well, or whether you'd be expected to pick both of them up if you do happen to want the quick reference for generic Space Marine units. I'd kind of hope that they would, really. I feel like certainly data card packs for armies like Deathwatch will be very on the anemic side if they chose not to. I think it is probably odds on. The Space Marine pack will contain a bunch of extra options for things like unique characters for Salamanders, Imperial Fists, and Ultramarines, so it's not like the Blood Angels cards would have massively more cards in them just because they've got to include the Blood Angels unique stuff. Next up, and sticking with the Space Marines, we've got a couple more interesting previews there. One interesting special rule called Space Marine Chapters in the Army Construction Rules, which I think Games Workshop had already softly hinted at, though I think it's very useful to see the actual rule in full. This one's an army construction rule, and it means that you can't include more than one chapter's units in your army. As we'd seen on a fair few datasheets, like say Death Company or Rabute Gilliman, a lot of Adeptus Astartes units have a second faction keyword, things like Blood Angels or Ultramarines. And this rule basically means that you can't mix two different chapters within one army, so you couldn't say have Rabute Gilliman with his Ultramarine keyword alongside Blood Angels Death Company, or Tor Garadon of the Imperial Fists alongside Deathwatch veterans. I think for the most part that's kind of sensible really. Maybe Rabute Gilliman could be argued to be a bit of a special case, being the overall commander of the Imperium, but I think in general it would be a bit weird if the optimal Space Marine army was somehow, say, unique Blood Angels units fighting alongside a unique Space Marines one with an Imperial Fist general. I feel like there's at least a decent chance that this could be the only major army construction for Space Marine forces. If so, then that could be a good sign for the Gladius Task Force. Perhaps Blood Angels, Dark Angels, and the like will have full unrestricted access, including bringing their unique units along like Death Company, Sanguinary Guard, or Ravenwing Dark Talons. For 100% final confirmation on that, we'd have to see the Gladius Task Force, provided there isn't a specific section calling out unique units from certain chapters not being able to be fielded, then I think you're all good. We shall find that out later this week though. Finally, last and just one other interesting aside is a new datasheet for the Primaris Captain. Maybe not too enormously different from the Terminator Captain, but he has got one fun special rule. As with the Terminator Captain that we saw previewed, he also has a special rule for his lead squad having a 0 command point stratagem each turn. Massive potential with all sorts of shenanigans there. Maybe one of the most reliable is just belting out Overwatch every single turn with some big shooter unit, but could also be pretty great for +1 to armor saves from Armor of Contempt, or a bunch of other shenanigans. His own unique special rule as the on-foot Primaris Captain is called Finest Hour. This one is rather fun and is basically turning on Rage mode for him for a turn. I guess you'd probably use this the first time your unit connects with the enemy. He gets +3 attacks for that turn and devastating wounds on his attacks, so that's mortal wounds on 6s. With his regular weapons, you either get 6 attacks for the Mastercrafted Power Weapon or 5 attacks for the Power Fist. Means he could be having 8 or 9 attacks there, and it means that you're pretty much guaranteed to not want to give him a standard close combat weapon. I think this guy absolutely needs a fancy power weapon rather than just a gun. Otherwise, no real enormous surprises on his war gear or stat line or anything like that. As with the troops, his Mastercrafted Bolt Rifle has been consolidated into one profile, 2 shots at 24 inches, Strength 4, AP 1 and Damage 2. Looks like it lacks the Assault or Heavy keywords that the Intercessors get for it though, a bit weird if it's an upgraded version. I guess the other interesting thing is his Relic Shield, which I guess will be for the Indomitus pattern captain. That one just gives him 1 extra wound, so he gets wounds 6 rather than wounds 5. I'd say probably a little bit less useful than the +1 to saves than he had previously. That was quite good at tanking light hits. I guess he'd need that Artificer armor upgrade from the Gladius company if he wants to have that and feel no pain now. Overall, an interesting clutch of little previews. Let me know what you make of the data card news down in the comments below, and how you reckon this is all going to unfold with the release of the PDFs and the Space Marine rules. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the regular 40k updates coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well. You can find that linked in the video description, and this is the main thing that allows me to keep on making videos like this quite so regularly. Channel patrons do get a few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.